Jack Tanner was a cowboy who had always preferred the silence of the open plains to the chatter of people. He wasn't like most men in his small town. He had a rugged exterior and a heart that seemed to belong to no one but himself. The truth was, Jack was a loner, and that wasn't by choice. It was the way he had become after losing everything that ever mattered to him. Years ago, Jack had a family. His parents had raised him on a small ranch where they lived a simple life. But one fateful day, an accident claimed the lives of his parents and his younger sister. It was a tragedy that shattered Jack's world. The pain of their loss never left him, and after the funeral, he simply shut everyone out. He couldn't bear to face the people who reminded him of his past. He decided to leave the town, the memories, and everything behind. Jack moved to the wilderness, to the quiet solitude of the mountains. He built himself a modest cabin far from civilization, where the only company he had was his horse and his thoughts. Life in the mountains wasn't easy, but Jack was tough. He learned to survive by hunting, fishing, and taking care of his small cattle herd. He spent his days riding across the rugged hills, enjoying the peace that the mountains gave him. But despite his tough exterior, Jack carried a deep emptiness inside. He had never thought much about love or companionship after that. It felt impossible to care for anyone again. His heart had closed up, and he convinced himself that he was better off alone. But deep down, a small part of him wished he could forget the hurt and open up to the idea of loving again. Yet that seemed far too difficult after all that had happened. One day, as Jack was riding his horse along a narrow trail that wound through the mountains, he noticed something strange. In the distance, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the light or a rock. But as he got closer, he realized it was a person. A girl, lying motionless on the ground. His heart skipped a beat. Jack wasn't used to seeing anyone so far from the nearest settlement. He rode closer, his instincts telling him to be cautious, but his curiosity getting the best of him. When he reached her, he was struck by the sight of the girl. She was young, maybe in her late teens, and she looked like she had been abandoned. Her skin was pale, and her body was trembling with fever. Her clothes were torn, and she looked like she hadn't eaten or drank in days. Jack didn't know what to do at first. He had no medical knowledge to speak of, but something about the girl moved him. Her face was peaceful, almost serene despite her condition. He could tell she wasn't from around here. Her features were delicate, and her long, dark hair had been braided in the traditional way of the Native American tribes. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow and uneven. Jack didn't hesitate. He dismounted quickly and knelt by her side. He knew he couldn't just leave her there to die alone. He had to help her. His mind raced for a solution. He could take her to town, but it was miles away and she wouldn't survive the journey in her condition. Without thinking too much, he gently lifted her into his arms. She was light, but her body felt limp, like it had lost all its strength. Jack decided to take her back to his cabin. He wasn't sure what he could do for her, but he couldn't just leave her to die in the wilderness. The ride back to his cabin was slow, and Jack kept checking on her, praying she would hold on. When they finally arrived, Jack carefully laid her on the small cot by the fire. His cabin was humble, with just enough room for him and the few things he needed to survive. He had never expected to have company, let alone a stranger in his care. For the first few hours, Jack had no idea what to do. He knew nothing about healing or caring for someone who was ill. His knowledge of medicine was limited to basic first aid, splints for broken bones, bandages for cuts, but he had never treated something like this. The girl was burning with fever, her skin flushed red and her breathing was strained. Jack used all the blankets he had to keep her warm. He went out to the nearby stream and gathered water to cool her forehead. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel an odd mix of emotions. On one hand, he felt responsible for her. He had taken her in, after all, but on the other hand, he didn't know if he was doing enough. The hours turned into days, and Jack worked tirelessly, trying everything he could to help her recover. He spent his days tending to her, making sure she had enough water and food even though she couldn't keep much down. At night, he stayed by her side, watching over her as she rested. Despite his efforts, the girl didn't seem to improve. Jack was growing more and more frustrated. He had never felt so helpless. He had always been a man of action, able to handle anything that came his way, but this was different. He couldn't control the outcome. Then, One evening, something changed. As Jack sat by the fire staring at the flickering flames, he heard the girl stir. He immediately turned to check on her. Her eyes were open, and she was staring up at him, her face soft and confused. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Jack wasn't sure what to say to her. She was a stranger, and he hadn't expected to be in this position. But there was something in her gaze that made him feel like he had known her for much longer than just a few days. The girl weakly lifted her hand and touched her throat, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the strength. Jack, not knowing what else to do, handed her a small cup of water. She drank slowly, her hands trembling. Jack couldn't help but notice how delicate she was. Despite her condition, there was a quiet strength in her that reminded him of the resilience he had lost long ago. The girl's lips parted, and in a soft, broken voice, she spoke. Her words were foreign to Jack, and he didn't understand them. He had never heard her language before, but somehow he felt the sincerity in her voice. "I'm not dead," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jack couldn't help but smile at her attempt to speak. It was clear that she was trying to say more, but the words didn't come. Jack simply nodded, letting her know that he understood. He would do everything in his power to help her recover, even if he didn't know how. Over the next few days, Jack continued to care for the girl, unsure of what would come next. He had no idea who she was, where she came from, or what had brought her to this place. But as he sat by her side, watching her slowly regain her strength, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He couldn't explain it, but something about the girl was changing him. He had spent years pushing everyone away, thinking that love and connection were just sources of pain. But now, with this stranger in his care, Jack was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than living in isolation. For the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to feel something beyond the deep loneliness that had consumed him for so long. He wasn't sure if it was the girl herself or the act of helping her, but something inside him was shifting. And it scared him, but Jack knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just walk away from her. He had made a promise to help, and now he had to see it through. Little did Jack know that in the coming days, this girl would not only teach him how to care for another person, but she would also teach him how to love again. As the days passed, Jack found himself settling into a new routine. He spent his mornings checking on the girl, making sure she had enough water and food, and doing everything he could to help her regain her strength. She had become a silent presence in his life, her illness still keeping her too weak to do much, but her quiet strength seemed to inspire something inside him. Jack's heart, once hardened by loss, was beginning to soften. He could feel it, though he didn't quite understand why. The girl, whose name he had learned was Sakari, had started to improve. Her fever was no longer as intense, and her once shallow breathing had deepened into a steady rhythm. She began to speak in soft, broken phrases, trying to explain who she was and where she came from. Her words were foreign to Jack, but the effort she made to communicate with him made him feel a strange sense of closeness that he hadn't felt in years. Sakari's body was weak, but her spirit was strong. She tried to sit up one morning, and Jack rushed to help her, surprised by how quickly she was recovering. As she sat, her eyes met his for a moment, and Jack noticed something he hadn't seen before: a spark of determination, of life. She wasn't just some stranger he had found in the wilderness. She was a person, full of stories, memories, and dreams that were just waiting to unfold. Despite their language barrier, Jack felt a growing bond between them. There were moments when she would smile at him, a small gesture that warmed his heart. He could see the gratitude in her eyes, and it made him realize how deeply her survival meant to her. She wasn't just fighting for her life, she was fighting for something more. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Jack and Sakari sat by the fire, eating a simple meal. The crackling of the flames filled the silence between them, but there was no discomfort in it. Jack had grown used to the quiet of the mountains, but now it didn't feel as lonely as it once had. Sakari seemed content just to be there beside him in the stillness of the night. Thank you," Sakari said softly, her voice still weak but filled with sincerity. Jack turned to her, surprised by the clarity of her words. "I would have died out there," she continued, her gaze fixed on the fire. "But you saved me?" Jack felt a lump rise in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. What could he say? He wasn't a hero. He had simply done what anyone with a heart would have done. But the way she looked at him made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose. I couldn't leave you out there, Jack said quietly, his voice rough. You were alone. Sakari looked at him then, her eyes searching his face as though trying to understand something about him. You're lonely too, she said softly, her words piercing the air. I see it in your eyes. Jack stiffened at her words. He hadn't realized how much of his loneliness he wore on his face. It was true. He had spent so many years hiding from others, building walls around himself. But Sakari, with her gentle spirit and kind heart, had seen right through him. He didn't know what to say. For the first time in a long time, Jack felt exposed. But instead of pulling away, something inside him made him want to open up, to tell her everything he had been holding inside. I lost my family, Jack began, his voice low and steady. Years ago. A car accident. After that, I couldn't bear to stay in town. I didn't want to feel anything anymore. Sakari listened intently, her eyes never leaving him. She didn't speak, but the way she looked at him made Jack feel like she understood. She knew loss. She knew pain. She had suffered too. I didn't want anyone to get close to me again, Jack continued. But when I found you out there, I couldn't just leave you. I don't know why. It's like something inside me just wanted to help. Sakari gave him a small, knowing smile. Because you have a good heart, she said softly. Jack was surprised by her words. You really think so? He asked, his voice full of disbelief. I know so, she replied. You saved me not because you had to, but because you wanted to. Those words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Jack had never seen himself as a good man. He had always thought of himself as someone who had been broken, someone who couldn't love again. But Sakari's words made him question that. Maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. Maybe he was capable of more than he had ever given himself credit for. As the weeks went on, Sakari continued to regain her strength. She became more lively, her laughter filling the cabin at times, and her smile became something that Jack found himself looking forward to every day. It wasn't just the physical care he had given her that had brought them closer. It was something deeper. They had formed a bond, one that transcended words, one that was built on trust, kindness, and mutual respect. Sakari's presence in Jack's life was slowly changing him. He had started to look at the world differently, with a new sense of possibility. He didn't feel so alone anymore. Sakari had reminded him that love in all its forms was worth the risk. She had shown him that opening his heart didn't mean he would be hurt. It meant he could heal. But Jack's transformation wasn't just about what he had given to Sakari. It was about what she had given to him. She had taught him to care again, to love again, and to open himself to the beauty of connection. One afternoon, as they were walking through the meadows near the cabin, Jack turned to Sakari. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found you, he said, his voice full of emotion. Sakari stopped walking and looked up at him, her expression soft and knowing. You would have found something else, she said. But I think we were meant to find each other. Jack couldn't help but smile. It was true. In a way, he had been waiting for this moment without even realizing it. He had been waiting for someone to remind him that love was still possible, that healing was still possible. And in Sakari, he had found not just a person to care for, but someone who had healed the broken parts of him he thought were beyond repair. In the months that followed, Jack and Sakari built a life together in the mountains. They worked side by side, tending to the land and animals, and spent their evenings under the stars talking about everything and nothing. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. What they had was real. Jack had found a new purpose. He had found love again, not the kind of love he had once known, but a love that was patient, gentle, and full of hope. Sakari had shown him that love wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about accepting the vulnerability that came with it, and choosing to move forward together. And as Jack looked into Sakari's eyes one evening, with the firelight dancing between them, he realized that he had found something he never thought possible. Peace, not just in the quiet of the mountains, but in his heart, where the echoes of loss had once lived. With Sakari by his side, Jack had found his way back to the life he had once abandoned, and this time, he was ready to embrace it heart and soul.